Welcome into episode 2 of Zollipod. If you've come back for a second episode, we're super glad to have you. That means you liked our first one enough to come back for our second one, and we're glad to have you today. Today is all about our journey in film. I am your host, Preston Moore. I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Carson. Carson, introduce yourself real quick.
Hey everyone, it's Carson again. If you listened to episode 1 and or our trailer episode, you know who we are. So if you're just joining in on episode 2, please be sure to go back and check out those episodes. We have a wonderful topic, and it's going to be a little bit different than last week. Preston, what are we talking about this week?
Today, we are going to be talking all about our journey in film. We're not really talking about current up-to-date stuff. I know last week was Oppenheimer, which was super fun, but today we're just going to kind of talk about our entire chronology, everything that we've loved, why we love movies, our first movies that we did love, and then the first movies that kind of got us into the art form of film and everything that went into that over the years, because it's been, I know for both of us, a long and wonderful journey. And then another thing that's different about this episode, we have our first guest, our first Zolly guest, Simon Firsht. He was a behind-the-scenes camera operator on a lot of movies that you have probably seen: Oppenheimer, Barbie, Dune, Dune Part 2, Nope, being the Ricardos. Zack Snyder's Justice League is another one. He's worked on a lot of big movies, and he's been one of the few people, as we'll talk about, he's been one of the few people that is on the floor with the actors, feet away from them as they're recording their lines. A lot of times sets kind of clear out once it becomes showtime and only have the people on the floor who need to be on the floor. And he is one of those people. We got to get his perspective and sort of how he fell in love with movies and the things that he loves about movies and what he loves about the art form and how it's changing and things like that. So it was awesome to talk to him. We're really excited for you guys to get to listen to that later in the episode. But Carson, I just want to go ahead and get started with our journey in film. Let's talk about the very first movie that you loved, because for me, and we've talked about this briefly, I think we have similar first movies. So go ahead. What was your first movie that you really, really loved that you remember growing up was the movie for you?
Yeah, so this was both the easiest and the hardest prompt for me to quote unquote research this week. And then as I was going down the line, I had that little voice in my head of Guillermo del Toro being like, animation is cinema. Because so many animated movies kept popping up. And it's obviously as a kid, you're more prone, I would say, at least in the era that we grew up in, of watching animated movies, being exposed to animated movies, both in theaters and in the DVD, VHS era. And also subsequently, when we grew up, Pixar was, growing into the behemoth it is today.
Right.
So the movie that I most vividly remember being my movie as a kid was Brad Bird's The Incredibles. And I specifically remember watching that movie in theaters and then going home and trying to draw the whole movie from memory, or draw scenes of the movie from memory, because I didn't want to forget it.
Really?
And
just
my mom's
on a piece of paper?
Yes, I took literally just print paper and I put out each thing, and I'm like, okay, scene 1, and I started trying to draw the different things. And obviously to this day I'm still a horrible artist, so it looked like chicken scratch, and I may actually have those pieces of paper somewhere, those crude storyboards, if you will. But I remember coming home from the theater. It was back in the era when you couldn't watch a movie 30 days later on Disney Plus. It would maybe come out 6 to 8 months later at the video store, and then eventually you could probably own it. And then I remember getting the DVD of it and just watching that on repeat. So that was my sort of seminal movie I remember being most absorbed by. Of course, there's tons of other ones that we're going to get talking about, especially, the franchises and the different things we were sort of enamored by. Preston, tell the viewers / listeners what your movie was and why it was so important / enamoring for you.
Oh man, this is something that I just love to talk about. My favorite movie since I was maybe 1 or 2 years old, very, very young. My favorite movie has always been, and to this day, I would consider it the greatest movie of all time. Obviously, I haven't seen all the movies of all time, but this is the best one I've seen, and it's been the best one I've seen since I was about 2 years old. It's The Lion King, kind of similar to yours. I love that story, and I know everybody kind of jokes about it. Well, it's just Hamlet with lions, and I'm like, yeah, Hamlet is a great story. There's a reason it's Hamlet. There's a reason that it's a big deal. There's a reason it's good. And I love The Lion King, and I don't know why. I think I love it for different reasons across different eras of my life, which is really interesting to me because when I was a kid, you know, I loved the music. The music is great. I loved the characters. I had a lot of fun with them. They're funny. Timon and Pumbaa were some of my favorites. And, you know, I just love all those little moments, you know, when you're a kid. And there are certain things that stick out to you that you latch onto when you're little. And The Lion King was just one of those things. And I think the music for me was a big deal growing up. And to this day, I mean, it's still, I believe, some of the best music ever put to film. That being said, nowadays when I watch it, I really love it for the animation even more so now, because that animation is so stunning and the characters are phenomenal, and I love the story more nowadays than I did. And I kind of view it as this cornerstone movie for me, where this is kind of how I fell in love with movies before I even knew that I was falling in love with movies. We'll talk about later in our lives when we really kind of started to appreciate the art form a little bit more than we did in the past. But for me, I was in love with The Lion King before anything. I would watch it every single day growing up, like every single day. You know, something like Mufasa's death. Spoilers if you have not seen The Lion King in the 27 years that it's been out. But I remember Mufasa's death. That moment, and again, that's another moment that to this day, I will cry. It's still too soon, you know, to talk about, to think about, because that moment is just so strong and emotionally potent. It is incredibly well done, to the point where to this day it hits me just as hard now, if not harder, than it did when I was watching it when I was 5 years old. When you have something like that, a storytelling moment that stands the test of time like that over the course of, for me, an entire lifetime, and that movie is chock full of them. Every other scene, it feels like, is just a moment that you remember, or a shot that you remember. You think of Mufasa in the clouds and Simba looking down into the water, or the whole Hakuna Matata montage, or his final fight with Scar and when he's roaring on Pride Rock, or, I mean, the opening of the movie, The Circle of Life. There are so many moments. I could rattle on and on and on about The Lion King. I absolutely love it. And yeah, that's kind of the first movie that I loved, and to this day it's still my favorite. I think it's funny, Carson, that you mentioned that you went home and drew the scenes of The Incredibles from memory. I love that, because you were literally storyboarding. It was a movie that already existed, but you were doing storyboards, which is what directors do now.
In the beginning of the movie, they're always either on the radio or the analog phone trying to figure out where the crime is going to be. And I remember trying to draw like a rotary phone and just being horrible at it, and it looking like the worst, like the thing not even being round, the dial not being round. But similar to your point about all these seminal moments in The Lion King, I think both these movies are pretty universal. Mm-hmm. And I resonated with you talking about how movies don't change, you do, and so your experience changes around it. In The Incredibles, as a kid, I'm like, oh my gosh, Dash is running on water, and we have these incredible action sequences, this super cool plane that flies and then goes into the water, and we got this whole secret layer. And then you start watching it as a teenager and adult, and you're realizing all the family dynamics, how mature the first Incredibles movie actually is. Yeah. There's a ton of stuff that just happens that's really heavy hitting, and they go through a lot of emotional turmoil in that movie. And to this day, it's my favorite Pixar movie. It's one of my favorite animated movies. Like The Lion King, it's gorgeous to look at. It's an amazing journey with the whole sort of ensemble cast, and then also the personal journey of Mr. Incredible and Mrs. Incredible. Yeah. And of course the villain too. As a kid, I'm like, who's this quirky looking guy with the carrot top hair and the whatever? But then it's such an interesting sticking point for that movie. And
his arc is one thing for me that really landed a lot harder as I was an adult. When I saw the moment between him and Mr. Incredible in the beginning of the movie, and then just kind of seeing the way that he resented Mr. Incredible as an adult. Now that you are an adult, you know, you're watching this movie as an adult now, and you're seeing Syndrome's perspective, and you can kind of think to moments in your childhood where you felt kind of let down maybe by someone that you looked up to or something like that. And you can feel how that kind of resentment can build over time. I always thought that was something that was interesting. And I want to touch on this because it's something that we've already talked about quite a bit, but the way that movies don't change, but we do, right? You know, that sort of idea is very interesting to me, and it's interesting that it's come up because my little brother, John, who I love more than anything in the world, him and his friend Jace recently, I came home and they were hanging out at my house and they had just watched the Goofy movie.
Oh my gosh.
And I talked to them about it. Talk about a movie that changes over time, the way you watch it. Anyone who has seen that movie as a kid and who has also seen that movie as anything over 16 years old probably has seen two different movies. But you watch that movie as a kid and you're just like, man, Max just wants to go to this concert. He needs to go. Goofy's being a bad dad. And then you watch it as an adult and you're like, go on the road trip with your dad, Max. He only has so much time with you. And it's just so... it hits you in such a different way. You feel so much sympathy for Goofy when you're an adult watching that movie because you get it. The idea of growing up in a way that you don't as a kid, in a way that Max doesn't in that movie. And it's just funny to talk about how movies don't change what we do, because that's a discussion I had literally 2 days ago. Not even thinking about this podcast whenever I talked about it, but now I'm thinking about it and I'm like, wow, that's such an interesting thing about that movie. And it's an interesting thing about a lot of movies. Carson, do you remember your first movie in movie theaters? Because that was, for me, a very big moment going to the movie theater. I don't remember my very first one, but I remember the first one that I remember, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I think it was my first movie, but it's the one that I remember going to the theaters for, and that's why it's special to me. Do you remember yours?
I think it was either Finding Nemo or maybe one of the early Harry Potter movies. I don't know specifically. Those are two that stick out in my head of movies that I went to. Because you have to remember, like, I'm thinking like circa 2003, 2004, when I was 4 or 5 years old or whatever it was.
Right, same.
And going back to Incredibles, I remember that theater experience, but I think even before that, I think I remember Finding Nemo. And the opening of Finding Nemo is so iconic that I think that's seared in my brain.
Yeah.
Of just seeing their home pop up on screen and immersing into that world, and that whole cold open is iconic. And it was unlike anything I've ever experienced, obviously, because going through the theater for the first time, it's sort of overwhelming, right? Obviously, we grew up with like TVs in our house and a radio and all sorts of mediums and advertisements and stuff playing, but going into the movie theater as a kid and just hearing the sound and seeing the picture as big as it is totally changed the game in terms of what I even as a kid could conceptualize as like entertainment. And I don't even think I conceptualized it as entertainment. I was like, whoa, like we're going underwater. You know, you don't think about things in terms of like mediums and technology. When you're a kid, you think about it as this transported you into whatever movie or whatever world, whatever character, or whatever story is happening. And so it was eye-opening, right? And I just remember that specific overwhelming feeling of the world changing around and being hooked on it, right? Like you just want to go back.
When you go to the movie theater for the very first time in your life, you mentioned we're used to watching it on the TV, we're used to watching it on the small screen. And when you go to the movie theater for the first time, that just recontextualizes everything you know about the movie experience. It is so different. And this is what I love so much about movies. This is how I fell in love with movies, is going to the movie theater. I do love, obviously, I wouldn't have this podcast if I didn't, but I love the craft of film. I really do. I'm very interested in it. I do it in a way for my job. You could say I'm making quote-unquote short films with the packages that I report on, but I love the craft of it, but I also love the experience of going to the movie theater. That is something that is so special to me. It's so sacred to me. Even growing up, before I knew that I loved the craft of making movies, before I knew that I was enamored and fascinated with movie making itself and with filmmaking itself, I just loved going to the movie theater. I just loved it. It didn't matter what was showing. Up until I was about 17 years old, I loved every single movie I saw in the movie theater. I never watched movies with a critical eye until after that, because I just loved everything I saw in the movie theater. And my first movie that I remember seeing in the movie theater is because it was my first PG-13 movie. I remember this because I begged and I begged and I begged. I was like, Mom, I have seen the first two. I've seen the original trilogy. I have to go see Revenge of the Sith or I'll die. Like, I have to see this in theaters because I don't think I was old enough. Attack of the Clones came out in 2002, which that's another movie that growing up I would watch on repeat. And
Same
Star
here,
Wars
yep.
is something that I know you and I both love. Attack of the Clones was my Star Wars movie growing up. So that movie has a very special place in my heart. I remember going to the theater to see Revenge of the Sith with my dad. I specifically remember, and this is so weird, you know those weird memories that you have that you're like, I don't know why this stuck in my brain, but this stuck in my brain.
I had this exact same thing where I wanted to go see Revenge of the Sith, and my dad snuck me out to go see it. I remember everything down to the showtimes in the newspaper. That's how you got showtimes. Either that or you drove by the theater and looked at the marquee on the outside to see when the showtimes were for the week.
Yeah, you would drive to the theater and see when the movies are playing later in the day so you can go back later in the day, which now is like such a crazy
which
thing
I love,
to
and I
think
think all that made it so special is like you just showed up and half the time you didn't know what you were seeing. That was a special thing. But this specific time was the first time I remember being like, we have to see this, Dad. And then it was PG-13, and I remember being a big discussion in the house. And then after the movie, it's like, okay, now don't tell Mom about Mustafar. You know, like that whole experience was
Don't tell
insane.
Mom what Anakin looked like after he fell into the lava.
It was like an out-of-body experience. Thinking back on it right now, I remember watching Yoda fighting Palpatine in the Senate chamber, and I like see my little self sitting there. It's so weird to think back on now. That is easily one of my most vivid theater experiences, and I think for a lot of people who were exactly our age at that time, this happened and we wanted to go so bad to finish the trilogy because we had Phantom Menace and we had Attack of the Clones, and I burned those DVDs/VHSs to the ground. And so
my Attack of the Clones DVD is probably, I would be surprised if it's playable anymore after how much I played it.
Oh my god, and the scratches on it and throwing it on road trips and like all these different things.
And it's so funny to me that Revenge of the Sith was this moment because you and we were born relatively close. I was, I believe, 5 or 6 years old when that movie came out. And it was one of those things where you're like, okay, I know it's PG-13, but come on, I've seen all of the other ones. I've seen them all. And this is the one. He's going to be Darth Vader. He has to. That's what's going to happen here. And it was just so like, I have to see that, Mom. I don't care. Like, I have to see that. And it's so funny to me because you mentioned you remember seeing the newspaper showing times. I remember seeing a poster. I guess they had a cross promotion. This is so weird because we didn't go here often as a kid, but we were around the time Revenge of the Sith was marketing. And I remember seeing a poster for Revenge of the Sith in Burger King. And just, I don't remember if I was with my dad in Burger King. I think I was. And my mom might have been there. I don't remember. But I just remember that poster. And that was me. That was the moment that I was like, oh, the new one's coming out. I have to see it. And that was before the days of the internet where now, if you're at all interested in this stuff, you're plugged in and you know pretty much who's going to be in every movie before it comes out, and you know all the details about it. You've seen everything about it. You've seen the trailer a million times. And back then, I was very much unplugged. We were all unplugged. We had to be. There was nothing to plug into back then. But it was a different time. It was a different era, and I loved that for it. I want to talk a little bit about Star Wars now that we're on the topic of Revenge of the Sith. I want to fast forward a little bit because I know that The Force Awakens in 2015 was probably a really big moment for both of us. I grew up loving Star Wars when I was a little kid, and then between Revenge of the Sith and The Force Awakens, I didn't fall out of love with Star Wars, but I wasn't into it. I didn't watch the Clone Wars when it was coming out or Rebels. I watched all of those later down the line. I only watched those in 2020 during the pandemic, during lockdown. That's how I spent my lockdown. I watched the Clone Wars and Rebels for the first time. And so for that gap of time in between Revenge of the Sith and The Force Awakens, I just kind of didn't really think about Star Wars. It wasn't on my mind. And then The Force Awakens comes out. They did a phenomenal job with that movie to this day of keeping it interesting, keeping it fresh at the same time, and making it something that added to the franchise while still, obviously, there are a ton of nostalgic callbacks in that movie, but it's still a good movie and it's still interesting. And for me, that was a moment, one of the few moments that I can look back on and say, this is a formative moment for me where I fell in love with movies themselves. That theater experience is one of my favorite ones ever. Seeing the crawl of the Star Wars, the intro and the crawl, episode 7, The Force Awakens, and the explanation of the context of it all. That opening crawl for me, that moment was so huge. Just seeing that as like, wow, Star Wars on the big screen, a new Star Wars movie. And I'm 16 years old and there's a new Star Wars movie. That's crazy to me. I never thought there would be another new Star Wars movie.
I didn't have to go with my dad. I could just go. I went with my friends opening night. I felt like my own person. I remember Revenge of the Sith, but it was very much tethered to that childhood sort of thing. This was right at the perfect time for both of us as teenagers. I imagine how people felt 15, 16 when Phantom Menace came out. And
yeah,
it's so interesting to have that experience because I'm with you. Harry Potter took over for me 110% from Star Wars. And so to see that first Force Awakens teaser, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, of that coming back and creating, still to this day, it's one of the most zeitgeisty cultural, and I don't say that with a negative connotation. It was genuinely thrilling and everybody had to be there. It was like Barbenheimer this past weekend, but obviously on steroids.
Yeah, it was a real moment in pop culture, and I think it has only really been replicated maybe by, you could say, Avengers Infinity War, probably. I don't even think you could say Endgame. I know Endgame made more money. I know Avengers Endgame is the biggest movie of all time, but I think that the hype surrounding Infinity War is more similar to the hype surrounding The Force Awakens. Like, this is a huge moment in a franchise that is beloved by mainstream audience, by so many people, millions. And if you're not there, you're missing out. There's no other way. You have to be there. You have to see it opening weekend. If you're a fan of this stuff, you have to see it opening weekend. And while I'm on that topic, I do want to talk about the MCU because despite my feelings on it now, which have sort of shifted and changed, I'm not as into the MCU as I was. I'm into certain factions of the MCU. The MCU was sort of what kind of got me into it, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I was a superhero nerd before I was a movie nerd. I'm a movie nerd because I was a superhero nerd. Because around the time that Age of Ultron, it's so funny that this is the MCU movie for me that sticks out, but I remember when Age of Ultron was coming out, I believe I still have a poster of it somewhere in my room, an Age of Ultron poster from opening night, because it was a really cool thing that I got to see, and I was super interested in this new franchise. I guess it wasn't new at that time, but I was sort of getting really into it, and I was really into the characters that they were adding. They were adding Vision and Scarlet Witch, and after the first Avengers, I was like, that was really cool, but now they're really expanding this universe with Age of Ultron. They're expanding this Avengers team, and then we're going to have Civil War in a year, and who knows what's going to happen then. And then, oh my gosh, when they brought Spider-Man into the MCU, I was already a huge Spider-Man fan. I loved the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield movies growing up, so to have that happen was just a huge thing for me, and that's what kind of got me into movies, and that kind of got me even more into the aspect of going to the movie theater, because then when I loved going to the movie theater to see these Marvel movies, whenever there wasn't a new Marvel movie, I was like, okay, well, I would still like to go to the movie theater. So then I started seeing other movies, and then I started falling in love with other movies, and that kind of got me into film itself. Was there a moment for you? Was it The Force Awakens where you kind of fell in love with that? And are there any other specific franchises or directors or actors that you feel kind of tied to?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings is another big one going back, and I didn't see those in theaters because it was just early enough where I
didn't see those in theaters
and
either.
So discovering those on DVD, just booting it up one day on those slow giant computer things where you have to go under the desk and get the DVD thing out, and then you pull it up on the screen. It takes forever to Windows Media Player to load, and then all of a sudden Fellowship of the Ring comes on, and you're like, what is this? What is the wizardry?
What a movie, what a trilogy. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, perfect.
I am obsessed with those movies now more than I've ever been. I've watched Return 100%. Of the King in theaters twice in the last year and a half, and that has been probably two of my favorite theater experiences ever, seeing Return of the King in theaters, even though I didn't see it in theaters till 20 years after it had come out.
But back to your original sort of question, Force Awakens is sort of what propelled me down the rabbit hole. I was in the cultural moment, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, how did this happen? This just came out of to me, not tapped into the Twitter sphere of week-to-week movie news and all of that stuff going on. This was my first time actually diving into the internet and being in a movie community and going down and seeing like, oh, I remember after the fact going and watched the Comic-Con behind the scenes stuff and the different things happening for that movie and seeing the behind the scenes and obviously seeing a lot of interviews with J.J. Abrams and connecting the dots like, oh, that's the guy who directed Star Trek 2009 and all these different things. You start to connect the dots, and that's what propelled me to like be in the know-how of week-to-week movie going. And so that catapulted me not to just to be aware of the big blockbusters, but of connecting different filmmakers to smaller projects that they're doing and different things that were in theaters and sort of developing my taste from there. Honestly, it came out of like waiting for the next Star Wars. I'm like, I need more to watch. Like I need to be up to date on this. And I'm so interested in the craft now that I want to just explore both past movies that I'm sort of tangentially aware of, but also just learning about the craft and learning from directors and listening to directors. I remember going back when I started my Blu-ray collection and listening to all the Peter Jackson stuff on the Lord of the Rings Blu-rays because I'm like, this is insane. In high school, that was my peak. How did they make Lord of the Rings happen? Obviously, you're aware of it, like, oh, wow, like this is a huge movie. But you start to build the vocabulary around it of how did they make this happen? How did they shoot this sequence? What went into this scene? The costumes, the cinematography, learning about what cinematography even meant. That all was propelled from The Force Awakens and sort of searching for filmmakers and up to this date of people I got interested in and then just never stopped from there.
That's interesting. And that is a question that remains to this day for me. How did they make the Lord of the Rings movies?
I know, I still have.
I feel like that question has become even more interesting to me as time has gone on. Because now with all the green screen and all the CGI and all of the things that they add and post of these movies, there was a viral photo of Samuel L. Jackson on the set of Spider-Man Far From Home where he's only just sitting. I know you know what I'm talking about. He's sitting in a room. He's sitting in a chair, and him and the chair are the only things that are not green screen. Yet there's nothing interesting about that shot. There's nothing special VFX that necessarily need to be added. They could have very easily just shot it in a room. He's just sitting in a room. That's all the shot is, and he's holding a gun. And he's not even holding a prop gun. The gun is CGI in that shot in Spider-Man Far From Home. And it's one of those things like, this didn't need to be all CGI. And the craft of movie making has changed so much. You look back at a trilogy like Lord of the Rings, where they didn't have the technology they have now. They didn't have the technology to do what they did on Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, whether you liked that movie or not, whether you liked their usage of CGI or not, and that could be said for many, many, many movies today. They didn't have that sort of craft. They didn't have the style of filmmaking. They didn't have the technology back then to do what they do now.
Yeah.
They rely on VFX even when you're not realizing it, and how much they change in post.
Yep. And the mentality of making movies has also shifted. People forget that The Lord of the Rings was a massive risk. Massive risk. This was unprecedented for someone to just like let this guy go to New Zealand and make 3 ginormous movies back to back to back, and then having to come up with all these different things. I was reading this article the other day. It was a retrospective in a cinematography magazine. It was with the cinematographer of Fellowship of the Ring and talking about the perspectives of how to shoot Gandalf versus any of the hobbits and how they did this all in camera and different things that they built and different angles that they conceived of and the art direction and the production design, all the things that went into making Gandalf tower over the hobbits to make this perceptual difference between these two people work in camera, and all of these decisions that had to be made. It feels like today people want to have less decisions to make. They want to be as risk adverse as possible. They want to, and obviously in filmmaking, it's all about vying for 100% control, which is never possible in any movie at any time. Something is always going to change. Something's always going to happen. But the mentality behind it has shifted. And that's where I think you and I have sort of watched Marvel go from giving these directors with different styles a chance to create this thing. And now it's sort of into this vetted,
It's very homogenized version
right.
of what it was. I agree. I think that we've seen that kind of change with Marvel. That doesn't mean that they haven't had good stuff. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 recently came out. I think it's
Still
the
one of
best
my
Marvel
favorite
movie
movies
ever
of this
made.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. If you were to ask me what my favorite movie is today, I would probably say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. That's the most rewatchable movie. That's my comfort movie. Obviously, The Lion King is my default favorite of all time. I still think it's the best movie of all time. But when I think of movies that now in my adulthood and since I've been college age at least and past that until now, Guardians of the Galaxy has been there. That's been the movie for me. The only movie that I can even compared to The Lion King is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and then maybe The Dark Knight as well. I loved The Dark Knight. That was a huge moment for me as well. I watched that movie over and over and over again in high school and in middle school, just obsessed with The Dark Knight. But yeah, it is interesting. And you mentioned the Gandalf and the Hobbit thing. I think that's so interesting because that's just one little thing that they had to think about. Could you imagine how many little things? Oh, how are we going to make Gandalf taller than the Hobbit? So how are we going to, shoot this in such a way that it conveys this? There's so many little things that they have to do. And in the midst of all of that, they managed to tell a phenomenal story.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that is insane that they managed to keep the narrative through line strong. It's really, really impressive.
Yeah. And really, movies are a miracle. And I think diving into all the behind the scenes stuff made me realize how much movies are a miracle. And what really sort of struck me in this era, post Force Awakens into college and studying film, was studying the roles of film and how people actually make all these little micro decisions through a director who wants a specific vision conveyed, but it takes hundreds of people to pull off that vision. How does that work? How do those individual roles make something happen on a film set for multiple days on end? And I think you and I both share in that fascination constantly of every new movie that comes out, of things we see that are just mystifying to us. How do people make that happen? Still to this day, I'll find things all the time, old movies, new movies. How did this happen? I want to know more.
It's almost hard to say any movie is bad. Like, I hate to say that there's a bad movie. I know that there are movies that I'll go and watch and I'll come out and I'll be like, yeah, that wasn't very good. But every single movie I've seen, even, God forbid, even Morbius, which was not my thing. I don't know whose it was. Actually, I do know whose it was. I know exactly whose it was. There are people who liked Morbius, and to me, that kind of is cool. That's kind of cool that there is a movie that a lot of people did not like at all. The fact that any movie gets made is a miracle. There are so many moving pieces. The fact that any of these things are made is a miracle, and you just watch them and you want to know, how did this happen? How did this come to be? What does it take? How many people were involved? And there's one way to know that, and that is by watching the behind-the-scenes documentaries, the behind-the-scenes features that they have, which we have someone who has done plenty of that work, almost exclusively that work. Simon Firsht joins the show with us. We're going to cut to that interview here in just a moment. Simon Firsht worked on Oppenheimer, Dune Part 2, Nope, Barbie. He is the guy who is on the ground doing all of the behind-the-scenes camera work. He is the camera behind the camera, and we have him join the show. We're going to cut to that interview right now. We hope you guys enjoy it, and we will be right back whenever we do our little outro, but we're going to cut to that interview right now. We hope you guys enjoy our conversation with Simon Firsht. All right, and joining me now is camera operator Simon Firsht. Most recently worked on Oppenheimer and Barbie, recently and notably. Obviously, those are the two big movies that came out most recently and are a big deal right now, but he's worked on plenty of other things. Simon, we're glad to have you here. I want to talk to you a little bit about your personal journey with film, because I think it's very interesting how different people interact with film and how different people fall in love with film in many different ways. Do you remember the first time that you kind of thought maybe you really, really loved this and something that you thought you could go into it as a career?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of weird, and it's not everyone's choice of movie, but Terminator 2 was the turning point when I was young, was the movie that made me think, okay, this is what I want to do. My father gave me a Nikon camera years ago when I was a kid, and he showed me how to use it roughly, and I went out and took pictures, and I loved the medium of taking pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an interest there straight away. to be able to have something tangible in your hand at that point when you had prints and a negative was an amazing thing. You take these pictures and your realization of the image actually comes to life and you've got it in your hand, regardless of how good or bad it is.
Right.
You have something tangible that you could go back to years in advance. And you have the same thing now, but back then it was actually physically negatives and everything else. But yeah, Terminator 2 was the turning point because Sony had brought out the small handy cams,
Mm-hmm.
which were like this size,
Mm-hmm.
with the video 8 tapes. And that at that point we could go out and you can edit to VHS. And I managed to work out how to do that from off the camera to VHS. And at that point, I knew there was something in it for me, and I absolutely loved filmmaking and the process of it.
Right, and that has obviously led to a career in filmmaking for you. So tell us a little bit more about your background and your career. Some of the films that you've worked on are some favorite films of, I know, some of our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, over the last few years, I've been very, very fortunate. I've worked on many movies. I think I'm up to, I don't know, 30 odd movies now, 35 movies, which is a lot. And it keeps me busy, thank God. But recently I did Nope, which was an amazing experience. It was 73 days of filming of principal photography in Santa Clarita. And it was phenomenal. It was the first time I worked with Jordan Peele
Mm-hmm.
and the team at Monkey Paw, and they were a phenomenal team. Jordan was very on board with what I do, and I just loved every moment of it. And there was another movie with Hoyte van Hoytema. It was shot in IMAX,
Mm-hmm.
so IMAX is just the most immense medium there is. And I hate to talk about it because everyone's talking about IMAX because of
Right.
Oppenheimer, but it was phenomenal when you think that each film square, as
Mm-hmm.
it were, 15 perth of film is almost 20 megapixels.
Yeah.
And not megapixels, 20K each
Right.
picture.
Wow.
And there's nothing else in the world, no digital camera can reach that
Right.
clarity. So it's the most phenomenal medium there is. So it's wonderful to work in.
And that's kind of something that I wanted to ask you about is you've worked on
Sure.
these films that are very large in spectacle. You mentioned Nope. That was kind of Jordan Peele's first foray into making something that is the level of spectacle that it is, how big and
Sure.
the grandeur of that film. You've also worked on Oppenheimer, obviously, as we've mentioned, as well as Dune. Dune is huge with that as well. Obviously, IMAX is a big part of all of these films, I feel like. What is it like from your perspective with what you're doing to work on films that are just really swinging for the fences and have this large grandeur presentation about them?
Yeah, it's funny because it's been a very gradual process for me. And I'm now at a point where I'm very lucky I can pick and choose the projects I want to work on. And to the viewers, don't ever give up. If you really love film, work hard, you'll get it. It will happen. But now I just love the fact that the movies that I'm working on are, I suppose, groundbreaking in a sense. I've just finished Dune 2, which I can't really tell you much about, but
Right.
I think we all kind of know. We've seen the trailer, and working in such medium, even for the crew working on the movie, and you're working with top people at that level because once principal photography starts, you're into 100 days or 70, 80 days of filming.
Right.
Once that train starts, nothing can stop it apart from a strike, of course.
Right.
But that train can't stop. You're on it and you're going. So you have to be top in your field to continue. It is a marathon. There's no doubt about it. You head into it and there's really hard days. There's some really amazing days and you just got to get through it. But something like Dune, it's the second one I've done with Denis and Tanya and the team and Greg
Yeah.
Fraser. Phenomenal team. Very small camera department, very small on a film so big. But that camaraderie between that front line team is really special. And because of that, it's hard work. You get through it. And it was the same on the first movie. The sets were phenomenal,
Hmm.
as you saw on screen.
Right.
There was set extensions, of course, but the second movie is just amazing. We shot most of it in Budapest
Hmm.
and Jordan and Abu Dhabi. The set builds in Budapest in Riley Studios were edge to edge, literally edge to edge. There was like 2 foot to get through
Wow.
each side of the sets,
Wow.
and they're enormous stages. And they didn't have enough room, so we had to go to another venue and have sets built there.
Wow.
And they were tearing them down and rebuilding as we were filming for we were going through the sets as we worked.
Hmm.
At that level, all of the movies, they're all very similar. Oppenheimer was, again, it's funny, the front line team are very small.
Hmm.
You always think, oh my God, there's hundreds of people right there. There is hundreds of crew,
Hmm.
but the front line next to the actors, there's only a small amount of people. It's a very efficient way of working.
Hmm.
And if you notice on Dune, and I'm sure your viewers have noticed, or yourself, that a lot of the stuff is not complicated filming.
Hmm.
It's straightforward filming. And I think that has come back to filmmaking
Hmm.
now. There's not all this very complicated CG. It's all kind of done in camera, and it's really important. And I think that's definitely coming back, especially in Oppenheimer. Same in Nope, you know.
I was going to say, how do you feel about that from your perspective, that this type of filming is coming back and there's not as much of that, like you mentioned, complicated CG, things like that? How do you feel
Yeah.
about that being the one that's working on these movies?
It's funny, I've noticed it going through 30 years of being in the industry.
Hmm.
You go through these ups and downs of working on many different types of movies. But the ones that are most successful are the ones that are simply shot.
Hmm.
It's just fact. It's storytelling at the highest level. And that storytelling, you can't fool people
Hmm.
with too much complicated stuff. It's just storytelling. And storytelling is simple when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a wonderful thing to watch. It's very hard to get right, really hard.
Hmm.
But when they do, it's just phenomenal.
It shows the magic on screen for sure whenever you do
Yeah.
have that simple style. I want to ask you a little bit, because a lot of the work that you've done is behind the scenes photography. And that's interesting to me because we hear a lot about the main cinematographers of these films, the director of photography, but we don't hear a lot about the people who are making the behind the scenes stuff. Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that perspective, because you've done that on a handful of, like we've mentioned, pretty large films. Tell us about what it's like to film those behind the scenes things.
Well, it's funny. When I left school, I studied as a photographer in a photographic studio.
Hmm.
I was there for many years. I then graduated, as it were, became a freelance photographer, and I worked for a number of different studios as a stills cameraman.
Hmm.
I then, funnily enough, went into sound for movies. And that was my background for many years. For 15 years, I did 22 films as a boom operator and a sound recordist. I did about 50 documentaries for the BBC
Hmm.
all around the world, traveling all over. When you're in that position, you learn everyone's position in the hierarchy all the way down. Because I'm on the front line with the camera.
Right.
As a boom operator, you're right there.
Right.
You're watching every word that's coming out of an actor's mouth,
Hmm.
and you know exactly what's happening on the floor. You have to be totally aware of lenses, totally aware of frame size, totally aware of the open gate, closed gate, whatever it is you're filming, size of the frame, movement of the camera. I've learned that way. I was fully immersed in what I was doing. You have to know the dialogue inside and out,
Hmm.
and you swing a boom. That's a very underrated job, and it's a very skilled job of a boom operator. It's
Right.
basically to be there and not seen. I did that for many years, and then in 2010, I think it was, before 2009, I gave up it all. I
Hmm.
gave up booming. The last film I boom swung was The Boat That Rocked. It was called Private Radio in the States with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Hmm.
Gave it all up, went out, borrowed the money, bought a camera, shot 2 documentaries. And one of the documentaries was picked up. It wasn't shown, but it was picked up by the BBC.
Hmm.
And then within 3 years, I was shooting behind the scenes on Die Hard,
Wow.
the last Die Hard movie.
Hmm.
And having the knowledge that I had in the background of boom swinging, I kind of knew what goes into a movie.
Right.
And if anyone is interested, please try and see. It's a Good Day to Die Hard, but making it what I called it was Making It Hard to Die. I can't remember, but it's an hour and a half documentary.
Hmm.
And at that time, I was the first person ever to use GoPros in behind the scenes.
Really?
And yeah, and it's common now,
Uh-huh.
but I basically was the first person to use GoPros.
Wow.
And that told the story of everyone's journey. I tried to tell everyone's journey because I know what goes into it.
Hmm.
So on every movie now I work on, I try and get that across. And the problem is that it's not a problem, but we've all seen behind the scenes.
Uh-huh.
And it's really the first thing that people Google when they announce a movie.
Hmm.
They go to YouTube or wherever and they'll try and search out anything they can of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I'm trying now to shoot behind the scenes in a specific way.
Hmm.
Although studios have, I work for all the major studios, they all have a certain way of cutting things and wants and their needs.
Right.
But I do try and shoot it cinematically and tell the story of everyone involved. If that gets used, I don't know, but I do try. And there's a documentary for Nope,
Hmm.
which I think is going to be up for a few awards. But I really did film a lot of delving deep into people's psyche when they're making movies like this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting to me because that's a lot of what we want to do with this podcast is make these stories accessible to a lot of
Sure.
different people. And that's why I think it's
Sure.
interesting to hear what your experience is and how you've done that, within the films, within the movies, on these behind the scenes work. Before I let you go, I have one more question for you. I want to kind of circle back to your journey with film. You mentioned Terminator 2 was the one for you. Kind of got you hooked on this stuff, and it turned into a career, a life for you. So in your work, any work, whether it was when you were boom operator, whether now when you're doing behind the scenes work, has there been any sort of influence or anything that you can think back to when I watched Terminator 2, I noticed this thing and now I still apply that and I do that in my own work today? Has it influenced that at all? Is there anything that you look back on and think those seeds were planted back with Terminator 2?
Well, I watched the movie not so long ago and it's dated now, obviously, because of the CG and everything that's involved,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still a great story and it's still told brilliantly by James Cameron. And that is the way I try and work is telling a story simply, but there's always drama. There's
Mm-hmm.
always drama on a movie.
Mm-hmm.
The skill of shooting behind the scenes, and this goes to anyone who wants to try and do it, is to be there but not be in anyone's face because it's a really hard job making
Yeah.
movies for everyone involved. But if you can be there and film it in a way that you're not there,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds really weird, but the experience of being on set is knowing when to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard part, is knowing, okay, I have to stop and walk away now.
Mm.
But you learn that. You learn it. There's always moments when no one wants you there,
Right.
and it's a really tricky thing to do.
Right.
But it's basically feeling the room. It's understanding the craft of filmmaking is really important. Don't be in shot, don't be in eye lines, don't be any of that. But getting stuff that people haven't seen before and really delving deep into trying to be close to the director as
Yeah.
much as possible.
Yeah.
I'm working on a movie here, which unfortunately shut down 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the big movie. We will be back. But again, working with the director who loves behind the scenes is a real pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'm getting stuff on this, which I've never had access before.
Wow.
So keep your eyes open. It's going to be phenomenal. It's going to be amazing.
Well,
So I'm
we
very
will be
excited.
keeping an eye out for sure for that. We
Yeah.
definitely will.
Yeah, that's great.
We definitely will. Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining the show. We really appreciate you coming on, being our first guest of the
wow.
podcast, actually. Yeah. So we're
Amazing.
glad to have you on, and we're excited to release this and let other people hear your journey with film, and we appreciate you coming on the show.
It's great. Thank you very much for having me, and good luck to everyone and yourself with the podcast. And it's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And that is it for this episode of Zollipod. We hope you enjoyed our conversation about how we fell in love with movies. And Carson, I don't know about you, but personally, there are so many movies that I wanted to touch on in this episode that I didn't get to. So we are probably going to have to do this again at some point, or go through some movies that we didn't get a chance to talk about, because there are just so many movies that I love growing up. If you are listening to this podcast, we are so thankful. We appreciate your support. Make sure you like it. Make sure you leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening to this. And please follow us on social media so that you can know when our next episodes are coming out, so that you can know what they're going to be about, so that you can know who's going to be in them. We have our first guest in this one, but we're really excited to bring you more guests down the line. We have all kinds of different people that we want to have on this show. We want to have actors, we want to have writers, we want to have costume people, we want to have all sorts of different people involved in movie making. We want to have documentarians, we want to have all kinds of people, and we are going to have all kinds of people on this podcast. We're so thankful to Simon Firsht for joining us. We're so glad that he was able to join the show. Loved his insight. My conversation with him was absolutely enlightening. It was phenomenal. It was great for me to be a part of. So make sure that you follow us on all platforms at Zollipod, Zollypod, at Zollipod. Make sure you follow us. Keep up with us there. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the above. You can find us there. Carson, where can they find you?
Yes, to stay up to date, just like Preston said, make sure you guys are following our socials at Zollipod, wherever you get your social media these days. I know the names are constantly changing, whether you're on X, Twitter, Threads, all these different places. However, also just make sure to subscribe to whatever podcast platform you subscribe to and or just open on a daily basis. So if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to subscribe to us there, and or turn on notifications. You'll get that notification as soon as an episode goes live every other Wednesday. And yeah, like Preston said, we were thrilled to bring you guys this first interview, first of many, and we can't wait to bring you guys more stuff, especially as we hopefully move out of the strikes and the actors and the writers become available to talk about current projects and beyond. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening.
Absolutely. And you can follow me at Preston C. Moore. Carson, if I'm not mistaken, you are at The Film Carson, correct?
That is correct. I forgot to plug myself after being asked to plug myself. Thank you to my co-host.
You're welcome. I got to keep you on track. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Zollipod. We hope you had as much fun listening to it as we had making it. And we will be back with another episode 2 weeks from this release date. Every other Wednesday, we'll have a new episode of Zollipod, and we're excited to see you then, and we will see you at the movies.